This is a PowerPoint presentation that is a review of 7th grade ancient history. So what you'll see in this PowerPoint are basic highlights from what you learned last year. While you are watching this PowerPoint, you can, in a separate window, open up the worksheet that accompanies the PowerPoint. If it's easier for you, you can also just watch the PowerPoint and then go back through slide by slide and answer the questions that go with the worksheet. The earliest humans were hunters and gatherers. They relied on animals and plants for food. So they moved constantly in search of their food. They had to go wherever the plants and the animals were. Early farmers, once the early humans began to farm, they practiced slash and burn techniques. And this means that they would actually burn off the underbrush from certain areas because they knew that that would help things grow back in the future. And so this is a technique that is still used today. People also began to domesticate plants. So that means they began to figure out specific plants that they could plant and grow for food. And they domesticated animals like dogs and cows and things like that. Once they did that, they were able to settle down and they started building brick houses and mud houses, and that led to permanent settlements. Farming or agriculture is known. The definition of agriculture or farming is planting of seeds to raise crops. So you put a specific seed in the ground with the idea that something's going to grow, usually something that you can eat. Society started wherever water was in supply, and people learned irrigation. Obviously, people needed to go wherever there was water in order to survive. And the definition of irrigation is moving water from one place to another. They also began to specialize in different activities, including weaving different cloth to make clothing. Mesopotamia. The word Mesopotamia means land between two rivers, which both of these rivers provided water and transportation for the early civilizations. It was between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. So this area that became known as the Fertile Crescent was between these two rivers. The yearly flooding of the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers created rich soil, allowing for good agriculture in early civilizations. However, the flood was unpredictable. It would flood at different times of the year, and this made it very difficult to predict when to plant your seeds. Because if you planted your seeds too early and the flood came, it would wash your seeds away. Or if the flood came too late or it didn't come at all, you wouldn't get your seeds planted at all. Hammurabi's code, something you learned about last year, was a code of law that was significant because it organized many of the already existing laws and included things like the phrase that you've probably heard before, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Or as a penalty, if you steal something, your hand was cut off. Thank goodness we don't have quite that strict of laws today. Although if you do think about it, in some states we still do have the death penalty today. When someone commits an act of premeditated murder, in some states they can receive the death penalty. And so in some ways we still have Hammurabi's code because that's similar to an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. The cuneiform was Mesopotamia's system of writing. And the cuneiform was one of the first systems of writing, and what it did was it helped people keep track of trade. They were able to write things down, and then from there they could figure out how much of certain products they sold and how much of certain products they traded for. Ancient Egypt, you learned about last year, was the area around the Nile River, which flooded every year, and much like the Tigris and the Euphrates, provided fertile farmland in the middle of the desert. The Egyptians developed irrigation and other techniques to be able to control the floodwaters that came from the Nile River, and some of these techniques are still used today. The Egyptians also had pharaohs. Instead of kings, they had something called pharaoh, and the Egyptians embalmed their pharaohs when they passed away, and built great pyramids as tombs so that the pharaohs would, they thought, make it to the afterlife from these great pyramids. And of course, the pyramids today are tourist attractions that people from all over the world come to see. The pharaoh was considered both king and a god as well. Hatshepsut was a pharaoh, and she was one of the first female pharaohs, and one of the first females that was in early history that was in a position of major authority over a huge civilization. So that is Hatshepsut. The Egyptians also had a form of writing called hieroglyphics that is very famous still today, and many people study hieroglyphics to try to understand what certain things meant to the Egyptians and try to interpret what they meant by it. Another civilization, another early group of people were the ancient Hebrews. And Judaism, which the Hebrews are members of the Jewish religion, Judaism was the first monotheistic religion. And that's a fancy way to say that they only believed in one God. Most religions today only believe in one God, but back then, most religions believed that there were many gods, and that is known as polytheistic. But monotheistic, Judaism was the first monotheistic religion, only believing in one God. According to tradition, Moses received the Ten Commandments from God. The Ten Commandments then became the basis for their civil and religious laws in Judaism, the Jewish civil and religious laws. The Torah became the Jewish holy book, and the Torah are the first 5 books of the Christian Bible that we know today. So that's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And tradition holds that Moses actually wrote those first 5 books, or the Torah. More about Moses here. In 1700 BC, a famine forced the Hebrews into enslavement in ancient Egypt. The Egyptians basically took the Hebrews as slaves, and at some point the Egyptians, or the Hebrews, were led out of slavery by Moses, who had received the Ten Commandments from God. And you may have seen the Disney movie about Moses in Egypt when you were younger. Ancient Greece is the next civilization that we'll talk about that you learned about last year, and Greece was made up of city-states, and each of these city-states was run by its citizens or members of the political community. This is a big deal because most civilizations there was only one person in charge, a king or a queen, or a noble person that was in charge. And in Greece, they had their civilization run by the citizens of each of the city-states. That was a really big deal, and something where we have today in the United States developed our idea of democracy from this model. 2 of the biggest city-states were Sparta and Athens. Sparta developed a militaristic government. In other words, they were looking to go to war all the time. Athens, on the other hand, in the complete opposite of Sparta, they created a democracy where the people had a vote, and they were focused on developing trade with other countries and other civilizations, and they also developed culture, things like music and art and mathematics. Athens and Sparta joined forces to defeat the Persians in the Persian Wars, but later they would end up fighting against each other in the Peloponnesian War. There were many accomplishments in Greece. Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire and spread Hellenism through Southwest Asia. The Greeks spread their art, architecture, and literature, theater, philosophy, mathematics, lots of different things the Greeks have given to the world. Some of the great Greek writers include dramatists like Sophocles, Euripides, and Aeschylus. The Greek ideas of art and architecture still influence different styles today. If you've ever driven by a house and you've seen those huge pillars in the front, that's Greek architecture, if they have huge pillars on the front porch like that. Greek philosophers tried to answer the big questions of life. Why are we here? What is our purpose in life? And Greek philosophers sat around and tried to think about those things. And some of their major accomplishments were the Greeks came up with the first Olympic Games. And of course, we still have the Olympics today. The world's first democracy, philosophy, as in trying to think about those big questions to life, with some of the philosophers such as Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. They also gave us literature, geometry, and written history. The next empire or civilization that we'll talk about is the Roman Empire. Rome is located in Italy, which is in southern Europe, and it's on a map. It looks like a boot. And it's in southern Italy, right above the Mediterranean Sea. Legend says that Romulus found Rome after killing his brother Remus in 753 BC. Rome was involved in a series of wars with Carthage called the Punic Wars. Carthage is located in North Africa across the Mediterranean Sea, and these wars took place between 264 and 146 BC. Hannibal was the main general for Carthage, and Julius Caesar was the main general for Rome. And after the Third Punic War, Rome finally just completely destroyed Carthage, ended Carthage's existence. And Julius Caesar, as the victorious Roman general, was named dictator of Rome for life. He had many reform ideas, but eventually senators were paranoid of his power, and they assassinated him before he was able to gain much more power. Augustus was Caesar's grand-nephew, and he became Rome's first official emperor. Under Augustus's rule, Rome expanded and enjoyed a period of peace for 200 years. This period of peace became known as the Pax Romana. Here you see a map of Italy, and you can see right here is Italy. It looks like a boot, as I mentioned. This is Italy, and then down here is Carthage. So you can see that Carthage and Rome were pretty close together, and that would make sense why they would end up fighting pretty often over that 70 or 80 year period. The last two things we'll talk about as far as reviewing from last year is two of the main religions. We talked about Judaism already, which you learned about last year, and the Hebrew people. We're going to also talk about Christianity and Islam, which are two of the religions that you learned about last year. Christianity was founded on the idea that Jesus of Nazareth preached love, compassion, and forgiveness. He often taught using stories called parables, where he told a story that had a moral or a lesson to it. Jesus lived during the times of the Roman Empire. The early Christians taught that people could gain salvation or be able to go to heaven through Jesus, who was the Messiah, who they called the Messiah. And then Jesus made many enemies in Rome and was eventually put to death. Accounts of his resurrection or his rising from the dead are what form the basis of the Christian belief that Jesus was the Son of God. St. Paul, the apostle, led the early church, and he was the one who taught that Jesus was the Son of God and that there was a Holy Trinity, or a Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. In 312 AD, Constantine became the Roman emperor. And in 330 AD, he converted to Christianity, which basically made every person living in Rome a Christian, because whatever religion the emperor was, everyone that was a Roman citizen also by default became that religion. And finally, we'll talk about another religion that you learned about last year, which was Islam. And Islam was founded somewhere around 610 AD by Muhammad. And Muhammad believed that God had revealed certain truths and certain things to him. And he wrote all of this down in a book. And that book became known as the Quran, which is the Muslim holy book still today. The main things that Muslims believe goes back to their 5 pillars. The 5 pillars of Islam are testimony, so that's telling others about your faith, prayer, praying to God, alms or giving, and that's helping people that are in need, fasting, which is taking time to not eat so that you can pray more, and then a pilgrimage. Muslims believe, the Islamic faith believes that once in your lifetime, if you are a Muslim, that you should make a journey to a place called Mecca, which is in Saudi Arabia, and that's their holy city. Much the same way as Christians and Jews believe that Jerusalem is kind of where their religion started. So that is a basic That is a basic overview of all of 7th grade last year in a short 15-minute video. And what you can do now is you can rewatch this. You can go through the slideshow if you would like to, but you want to answer the questions that go along with the worksheet that accompany this PowerPoint.